claims that they would do so. Indeed, they do so. So the labeling that they use in describing Donald, if they think the audience kind of likes Donald, they use more positive than negative labeling. If they think the audience dislikes Donald, they use more negative than positive labeling. So there's a clear tuning effect. This particular effect is very strong. It's a tuning effect. It's been found in hundreds of studies, and it itself is not especially surprising because you really should take your audience into account. The purpose of the study was to see what this actually did to the communicator with respect to their own memory later for Donald. Okay, so the idea would be if you're tuning just to follow the rules, if you're tuning just to be polite, then later when you're asked to recall the original information, the actual behavioral descriptions you read, if you're asked to reproduce them word for word, then how you tune is really irrelevant, and you should use your memory for the original information and recall it in the same evaluatively ambiguous way. The other possibility is that you won't do that, and that your message, which was tuned, in that sense biased toward the audience, that may in fact affect your own memory later about what you originally had read. And so that was really the issue, would it? And it does, and it does so remarkably. And so this is the original study, this is the original data. There was an immediate recall in one condition, or in another condition, the recall happened 2 weeks later. In the case where it was 2 weeks later, the correlation between the evaluative tone of the message and the evaluative tone of the recall was plus 0.66 over 2 weeks. Now, that was the highest correlation that I'd ever seen. So rather than disappearing, when it was a 15-minute recall, it was like plus 0.34. It actually got larger over time. So it's a massive effect. Okay? And in a way, it's almost determining memory, especially in this delay. It's almost, your memory is the message. And because of that, I called this the saying is believing effect. Okay? And that's the name of the phenomenon today, saying is believing effect. So when I originally did this, I was as much a cognitive psychologist as a social psychologist. I certainly was not a motivation scientist yet. And I thought about this in purely information processing terms, really. I mean, I thought of the tuning as social, but I thought of the effect, the same as believing, as really being a cognitive effect. And I thought of it as, well, there's a mental representation of the original information, and then there's a second mental representation of the message. The second representation has an advantage cognitively because it's chunked, okay, it's labels, and therefore it has an advantage in reconstructive memory. And that's the way I thought of it. And that's the way I thought of it for several years, until I was asked to give a talk at the International Language and Social Psychology Conference, and I decided to rethink all this work that I'd done on saying is believing. And after I looked at it, I came to the conclusion that no, actually it's not an information processing effect, it's actually a motivation science effect, and it's actually shared reality. And that what's actually happening here is that the communication is creating a shared reality with the audience about Donald. The fact that Donald is evaluatively ambiguous matters because you don't know the truth, actually, about Donald. You don't know if Donald is good or bad. It's evaluatively ambiguous. You try to create a shared reality with your audience in order to have a reality. That's why you're tuning. Once you create the shared reality in your message, that is what's real. Shared reality is what's real, and if it's what's real, therefore your memory should reflect it. And that was what I thought. Okay, so I thought that. I didn't have any evidence for it. And then Gerald Eckerhoff came here for a postdoc, and we started talking about this, and I mentioned, the shared reality idea, and he said, well, have you tested it? And I said, no. He said, why don't we test it? So we started with a simple way of testing it, which is basically we had never given feedback to the communicator as to whether they had been successful or not when they had communicated. The study ended. But the point is that if the communicator is told that, oh, by the way, your audience was not able to identify Donald successfully, in other words, failure, then there's no shared reality. From an information processing point of view, at least hard-nosed information processing, who cares? You have the message, it's going to affect your memory, reconstruct the recall. But from a shared reality point of view, it really matters whether you did or did not actually end up with a shared reality. And so if you're told, by the way, there was no shared reality, it should make the whole thing disappear. So that was the question. So this is just a kind of an overview of what matters in shared reality. And so one of the ones that I basically just mentioned is that what's important is that you actually succeed in shared reality. The other thing that I'll be getting to is it also matters what your goal is. So I'll be talking about that too. But these are the different features of shared reality that we wanted to start testing. So the first one was this, and the study was very simple. It was exactly like the original paradigm, except now you were giving feedback. Basically you get, obviously, the tuning doesn't matter. You get the same amount of tuning in those two conditions because the feedback comes after the tuning. So the amount of tuning is exactly the same, whether you later get successful feedback or failed feedback. But the question is the recall, the memory valence affected by the tuning? And what this shows is that in the success condition, you get exactly the original effect, where if you tune towards the positive attitude audience versus the negative attitude audience, you get this significant difference in recall, like the original. But if you get failure feedback, it's totally eliminated. So this entire thing is the leading effect is eliminated. Okay? Once you get the feedback that basically says there was no shared reality. Okay, and the next thing, as I mentioned, that's important is why are you tuning? So the notion here is that as I said, that you're tuning in order to create a shared reality. Okay, that's really why you're doing it. But what if you're tuning for some other reason, not for shared reality? So we set two other goal conditions for why we tune. In one condition, we set the condition where you tune instrumentally. You're told that the audience is and you are in study one. There's also study two. Your audience partner actually is going to be the person who can choose who they want to be with in the next part of the study. And the next part of the study is a different part of the study, and it's something where you can make money in it. And they're the one who's going to decide whether to choose you or not as the partner. So now you want to tune, just so this person will kind of want you to be their partner, because you've shown you're a good partner. And so you get tuning, but it's not for shared reality, it's purely for incentive. The other condition was an entertainment condition, where you're tuning just really for the fun of it. And you're told, it's always fun when you're communicating to sort of caricaturize somebody. So why don't you just sort of exaggerate whatever you think Donald is? That'll be fun. So now you're tuning not for shared reality, but just because it's a fun thing to do. It kind of exaggerate how likable Donald is or not likable Donald is. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the tuning. So as you can see, you get the shared reality tuning. That's a significant effect. And the incentive condition is actually even larger, so it's even more tuning. And in the entertainment, it's even more tuning. So the amount of tuning is actually greater in the two non-shared reality cases. It's greater in incentive and entertainment than it is in shared reality. This is important because if it's about the message, right, and it's about the message creating reconstructive memory error, then it should be even more prevalent in the incentive condition and entertainment condition later, because the messages are even more exaggerated. Okay? Whereas if it's really about the motivation to share reality, then you should only get the same as believing effect in the shared reality condition, not in the other two conditions. Okay? And so this is what happens. In the recall, in the shared reality condition, you again get a significant difference in the valence of the memory. But in the incentive condition and the entertainment condition, it's completely eliminated. Okay? So if you're not doing it for shared reality, you do not get the same as believing effect. Even though from an information processing point of view, you certainly could. Okay, so in this study, because it's supposed to be about shared reality, we actually asked the communicators, how well does your message to your addressee reflect Michael's, not Michael, not Tony, reflect Michael's real characteristics? To what extent could other people trust the view of the target person you express in your message to the audience? So is your message the truth? Is your message the truth? Okay? Because shared reality is about the truth. And what you find, first of all, as you'll see, is there is again a goal effect on that. So you consider your message to be the truth if you, in fact, your goal was shared reality. If your goal was just an incentive to make money, get them to choose you, or entertainment, you don't consider it to be the truth. Okay? And the question is, does that end up mediating the whole same as believing recall effect? And the answer is yes. So it is in fact the case that the tuning goal affects whether you think the message is the truth. The message truth determines this whole same as believing effect on memory. And it's a full mediation. Okay? So it is about shared reality, and it is about that shared reality is the truth. But shared reality is reality. And that's why you get the effect. Okay, well, there's another kind of truth. Okay? And that is the kind of truth that relates to the kind of person that the audience is. So do you think of your audience as the kind of person who has the truth? Is this the kind of person you, in fact, even want to have the truth with? Right? And we in social psychology know that there's a variable that has a lot to do with whether you want to have a relationship with someone or whether you think they have epistemic truth, and it's called the in-group out-group phenomenon. Right? So when you're communicating to an in-group, this is somebody that you actually think has the truth. This is someone that you want to connect to. If it's an out-group member, not so much. Okay? Now, it's still the case with an out-group member that you may tune, because that's being polite. But after you tune, it doesn't matter, because this is not something you want to create shared reality with. You really don't think it's that kind of person. Okay? And you don't really trust their attitude toward Michael. This study was done in Germany. So it was done in a German university where there are German students and Turkish students. So the German students are always the communicators, and they're communicating to an audience that's either another German student or to an audience that's a Turkish student. Okay? Again, the amount of tuning is a function of whether the audience likes or dislikes Donald. It doesn't vary. So even if it's an out-group Turkish student, you still tune to the attitude. Okay? Because again, that's being polite. Okay? But the question is, do you get a same as believing effect? So, I guess I'm going right to the mediation analysis. So the first thing was, again, to check on whether this was an audience that you trust, okay? So, and must be the next question. So they were asked this question. Do you think, and then the name was a German name or a Turkish name, okay, depending on whether it was the audience was German or Turkish. Do you think is a person whose judgment about other people one can trust? So that was a direct effect, and on that, what happened, you got an in-group out-group effect. So not surprising, when it was an in-group, you trusted the attitude of the audience more than when it was an out-group. Okay? So now the question is, what does that do to the Satan's believing effect? And what happens is that when it's an in-group member, German talking to a German, you again replicate the Satan's believing effect. But when it's a German talking to an out-group member, it disappears. Okay? There's no significant effect anymore of attitude. Okay? So when it's an out-group member, it disappears. Why does it disappear? It disappears because trust in audience is the mediator. Okay? So the audience group membership in group out-group determines whether you trust that audience with respect to their attitudes. That determines the Satan's believing effect we call rise, and it's a full mediation. Okay? So it's all about trust. It's all about shared reality. Okay, so what these different studies, and we have other kinds of studies that also eliminate the effect in other ways, but I just want to give myself a few minutes just to wrap up the full story. What we know from these kinds of studies is that this saying is a believing effect is not, in fact, a simple story about just information processing and having two mental representations or whatever. That it actually does have to do with the fact that when you try to create a shared reality with someone in your message, okay, and you do so successfully, then that becomes the truth. And as such, it is the determinant of memory because it is, after all, the truth. Anything that disrupts the shared reality, that you thought you had shared reality, but you get feedback that you didn't, so it didn't work. Or you have this idea that I'm not tuning for shared reality at all, I'm tuning for something else, instrumentality, entertainment. Or this is something I don't want shared reality with as an out-group member. If anything like that happens, you're actually eliminating some of the determinants of something being a shared reality. Once you do that, it's no longer shared reality, and this entire effect disappears. Now, this effect is so strong that in my introductory social psychology class, we do as an exercise, out-of-class exercise, we do this in-group, out-group, do this success failure feedback. And because it's an exercise in class, sometimes the success failure feedback is not given until like 6 days later or 7 days later. It takes a while for undergraduates to finish the study. And what's incredible is that even though the final failure feedback is given 5-7 days later, okay, it makes the thing disappear. It makes the whole memory effect disappear. Okay? So if you think about classic models of memory, I mean, this is, consolidation shouldn't work like this. I mean, it's done, right? It's baked, as they say. But it's not. You can instantly just change the shared reality and change memory. So this is how powerful shared reality is. And in a way, we shouldn't be surprised about this. We shouldn't be surprised because shared reality is what makes us human. Shared reality is what makes us distinctive. And more than anything else about us, it's our motive to share reality with others that truly makes humans what we are, and it shows up in all kinds of ways. With respect to memory, and this kind of memory is very important because as Gerald and I talk about this, we're constantly talking to each other in dyadic communication. We're constantly tuning to each other. And so there's a very real sense that this phenomenon of tuning and memory is the DNA of what we call culture. That it is exactly how culture is formed, by this constant interpersonal, small dyadic communications. And then that over time is what constructs culture over time. So it's very important for that reason. And it's also important, and I'm going to end with this, to remember that it's not like the good news story, or just the good news story. It is essentially what we are, but that's not necessarily a good news story because precisely as shown by the in-group out-group difference, right? You have shared reality with your in-group, you don't have it with your out-group. And if shared reality is reality, then what that actually means is that if this other group and their shared reality is not the same as yours, then they must either be lying because they know that you in fact have the truth and they're just lying, or they're really stupid that they can't figure it out, or they're crazy And all of those reactions are what we see in the public, and not just in the Middle East, but even among Democrats versus Republicans. So they're either crazy, they're stupid, or just lying. Right? So you get all of these reactions. And so it's fundamental to our major problems. And so it's the best of us and the worst of us. Thank you.